Chapter 22. Mary Claude is correct, Miss Emily said. I'm the one to whom you should be speaking. Mary Claude worked hard for our project, and the way it all ended has left her feeling somewhat disillusioned. As for myself, whatever the disappointments, I don't feel so badly about it. I think what we have achieved merits some respect. Look at the two of you. You've turned out well. I'm sure you have much you could tell me to make me proud. What did you say your names were? No, wait. I think I shall remember. You're the boy with the bad temper. A bad temper, but a big heart. Tommy, am I right? And you, of course, are Kathy H. You've done well as a carer. We've heard a lot about you. I remember, you see. I dare say I can remember you all. What good does it do you or them? Madame asked, then strode away from the wheelchair, past the two of us and into the darkness, for all I know to occupy the space Miss Emily had been in before. Miss Emily, I said, it's very nice to see you again. How kind of you to say so. I recognize you, but you may well not have recognized me. In fact, Kathy H., not so long ago, I passed you sitting on the bench out there, and you certainly didn't recognize me then. You glanced at George, the big Nigerian man pushing me. Oh, yes, you had quite a good look at him, and he at you. I didn't say a word, and you didn't know it was me. But tonight, in context, as it were, we know each other. You both look rather shocked at the sight of me. I've not been well recently, but I'm hoping this contraption isn't a permanent fixture. Unfortunately, my dears, I won't be able to entertain you for as long as I'd like just now, because in a short while some men are going to take away my bedside cabinet. It's quite a wonderful object. George has put protective padding around it, but I've insisted I'll accompany it myself for the time. You never know with these men. They handle it roughly, hurl it around the vehicle, then their employer claims it was like that from the start. It happened to us before, so this time I've insisted on going along with it. It's a beautiful object. I had it with me at Hilsham, so I'm determined to get a fair price. So when they come, I'm afraid that's when I shall have to leave you. But I can see, my dears, you come on a mission close to your hearts. I must say, it does cheer me to see you. And it cheers Mary Claude, too, even though you never know it, to look at her. Isn't that so, darling? Oh, she pretends it's not so, but it is. She's touched that you've come to find us. Oh, she's in a sulk. Ignore her, students. Ignore her. Now, I'll try and answer your questions the best I can. I've heard this rumor countless times. When we still had Hilsham, we'd get 2 or 3 couples each year, trying to get in to talk to us. One even wrote to us. I suppose it's not hard to find such a large estate like that if you mean to break the rules. So you see, it's been there, this rumor, from long before your time. She stopped, so I said, What we want to know now, Miss Emily, is if the rumor's true or not. She went on gazing at us for a moment, then took a deep breath. Within Hilsham itself, whenever this talk started up, I made sure to stamp it out good and proper. But as for what students said after they left us, what could I do? In the end, I came to believe, and Mary Claude believes this too, don't you, darling? I came to believe that this rumor, it's not just a single rumor. What I mean is, I think it's one that gets created from scratch over and over. You go up to the stores, stamp it out, you're not starting again elsewhere. I came to this conclusion and ceased to worry about it. Mary Claude never did worry about it. Her view was, if they're so foolish, let them believe it. Oh, yes, don't show me that sour face of yours. That's been your view of it from the beginning. After many years of it, I came not exactly to the same viewpoint, but I began to think, well, perhaps I shouldn't worry. It's not my doing after all. And for the few couples who get disappointed, the rest will never put it to the test anyway. It's something for them to dream about, a little fantasy. What harm is there? But for the two of you, I can see this doesn't apply. You are serious. You've thought carefully. You've hoped carefully. For students like you, I do feel regret. It gives me no pleasure at all to disappoint you. But there it is. I didn't want to look at Tommy. I feel surprisingly calm. And even though Miss Emily's words should have crushed us, there was an aspect to them that implied something further, something being held back, that suggested we hadn't yet got to the bottom of things. There was even the possibility she wasn't telling me the truth, so I asked, "Is it the case, then, that deferrals don't exist? There's nothing you can do?" She shook her head slowly from side to side. "There's no truth in the rumor. I'm sorry. I truly am." Suddenly, Tommy asked, "Was it true once, though, before Hailsham closed?" Miss Emily went on shaking her head. "It was never true. Even before the Morningdale scandal. Even back when Hailsham was considered a shining beacon, an example of how we might move to a more humane and better way of doing things. Even then, it wasn't true. It's best to be clear about this. A wishful rumor. That's all it ever was. Oh dear, is that the man coming for the cabinet?" The doorbell had gone, and footsteps came down the stairs to answer it. There were men's voices out in the narrow hall, and Madame came out of the darkness behind us, crossed the room, and went out. Miss Emily leaned forward in the wheelchair, listening intently. Then she said, "It's not them. It's that awful man from the decorating company again. Mary Claude will see to it. So, my dears, we have a few minutes more. Was there something else you wished to talk to me about? This is all strictly against regulations, of course, and Mary Claude should never have asked you in. And naturally, I should have turned you out the second I knew you were there here. But Mary Claude doesn't care much for their regulations these days, and I must say neither do I. So if you wish to stay a little longer, you're very welcome." "If the rumor was never true," Tommy said, "then why did you take all our art stuff away? Didn't the gallery exist either?" "The gallery? Well, that rumor did have some truth to it. There was a gallery. And after a fashion there still is. These days it's here, in this house. I had to prune it down, which I regret, but there wasn't room for all of it in here. But why did we take your work away? That's what you're asking, isn't it?" "Not just that," I said quietly. "Why did we do all of that work in the first place? Why train us, encourage us, make us produce all of that? If we're just going to give donations anyway, then die. Why all those lessons? Why all those books and discussions? Why Hailsham at all?" Madame had said this from the hallway. She came past us again and backed into the darkened section of the room. "It's a good question for you to ask." Miss Emily's gaze followed her, and for a moment remained fixed behind us. I felt like turning to see what looks were being exchanged, but it was almost like we were back at Hailsham, and we had to keep facing the front with complete attention. Then Miss Emily said, "Yes, why Hailsham at all? Mary Claude likes to ask that a lot these days, but not so long ago, before the Morningdale scandal, she wouldn't have dreamed of asking a question like that. It wouldn't have entered her head. You know that's right, don't look at me like that. There was only one person in those days who would ask a question like that, and that was me. Long before Morningdale, right from the very beginning, I asked that. And that made it easy for the rest of them. Mary Claude, all the rest of them. They could all carry on without a care. All you students, too. And that made it easy for the rest of them, Mary Claude. All the rest of them. They could all carry on without a care. All you students, too. I did all the worrying and questioning for the lot of you. And as long as I was steadfast, then no doubts ever crossed your minds, any of you. But you asked your questions, dear boy. Let's answer the simple one, and perhaps it will answer all the rest. Why did we take your artwork? Why did we do that? You said an interesting thing earlier, Tommy, when you were discussing this with Mary Claude. You said it was because your art would reveal what you were like inside. That's what you said, wasn't it? Well, you weren't far wrong about that. We took away your art because we thought it would reveal your souls. Or to put it more finely, we did it to prove you had souls at all. She paused, and Tommy and I exchanged glances for the first time in ages. Then I asked, "Why did you have to prove a thing like that, Miss Emily? Did someone think we didn't have souls?" A thin smile appeared on her face. "It's touching, Kathy, to see you so taken aback. It demonstrates, in a way, what we did our job well. As you say, why would anyone doubt you had a soul? But I have to tell you, my dear, it wasn't something commonly held when we first set out all those years ago. And though we've come a long way since then, it's still not a notion universally held, even today. You Hillsham students, even after you've been out in the world like this, you still don't know the half of it. All around the country, at this very moment, there are students being reared in deplorable conditions, conditions you Hillsham students could hardly imagine. And now we're no more, things will only get worse." She paused again, and for a moment she seemed to be inspecting us carefully through narrowed eyes. Finally she went on. "Whatever else, we at least saw to it that all of you in our care, you grew up in wonderful surroundings. And we saw to it, too, after you left us, you were kept away from the worst of those horrors. We were able to do that much for you, at least. But this dream of yours, this dream of being able to defer, such a thing would always have been beyond us to grant, even at the height of our influence. I'm sorry. I can see what I'm saying won't be welcome to you. But you mustn't be dejected. I hope you can appreciate how much we were able to secure for you. Look at both of you now. You've had good lives, you're educated and cultured. I'm sorry we couldn't secure more for you than what we did, but you must realize how much worse things once were. When Mary Claude and I started out, there were no places like Hillsham in existence. We were the first, along with Glamorgan House. Then a few years later came the Saunders Trust. Together, we became a small but very vocal movement, and we challenged the entire way the donations program was being run. Most importantly, we demonstrated to the world that if students were reared in humane, cultivated environments, it was possible for them to grow to be as sensitive and intelligent as any ordinary human being. Before that, all clones, or students, as we prefer to call you, existed only to supply medical science. In the early days after the war, that's largely all you were to most people. Shadowy objects in test tubes. Wouldn't you agree, Mary Claude? She's been very quiet. Usually you can't get her to shut up on this subject. Your presence, my dears, appears to have tied her tongue. Very well. So to answer your question, Tommy, that was why we collected your art. We selected the best of it and put on special exhibitions. In the late 70s, at the height of our influence, we were organizing large events all around the country. There'd be cabinet ministers, bishops, all sorts of famous people coming to attend. There were speeches, large funds pledged. "There, look," we could say. "Look at this art. How dare you claim these children are anything less than fully human?" Oh, yes, There was a lot of support for our movement back then. The tide was with us. For the next few minutes, Miss Emily went on reminiscing about different events from those days, mentioning a lot of people whose names meant nothing to us. In fact, for a moment, it was almost like we were listening to her again at one of her morning assemblies as she drifted out on tangents none of us could follow. She seemed to enjoy herself, though, and a gentle smile settled around her eyes. Then suddenly she came out of it and then said in a new tone, "But we never quite lost touch with reality, did we, Mary Claude? Not like our colleagues at the Sanders Trust. Even during the best of times, we always knew what a difficult battle we were engaged in. And true enough, the Morningdale business came along, then one or two or other things, and before we knew it, all our hard work had come undone." "But what I don't understand," I said, "is why people would want students treated so badly in the first place." "From your perspective today, Kathy, your bemusement is perfectly reasonable. But you must try and see it historically. After the war in the early 50s, when the great breakthroughs in science followed one after the other so rapidly, there wasn't time to take stock, to ask the sensible questions. Suddenly, there were all these new possibilities laid before us, all these ways to cure so many previously incurable conditions. This was what the world noticed the most, wanted the most. And for a long time, people preferred to believe these organs appeared from nowhere, or at least, or at most, that they grew in a kind of vacuum. Yes, there were arguments, but by the time people became concerned about students, by the time they came to consider just how you were reared, whether you should have been brought to existence at all, well, by then it was too late. There was no way to reverse the process. How can you ask a world that has come to regard cancer as curable? How can you ask such a world to put away that cure, to go back to the dark days? There was no going back. However uncomfortable people were about your existence, their overwhelming concern was that their own children, their spouses, their parents, their friends did not die from cancer, motor neuron disease, heart disease. So for a long time you were kept in the shadows, and people did their best not to think about you. And if they did, they tried to convince themselves you weren't really like us, that you were less than human, so it didn't matter. And that was how things stood until our little movement came along. But do you see what we were up against? We were virtually attempting to square the circle. Here was the world requiring students to donate. While that remained the case, there would always be a barrier against seeing you as probably human. Well, we fought that battle for many years, and what we want for you, at least, were many improvements, though, of course, you were only a select few. But then came the Morningdale scandal, then other things, and before we knew it, the climate had quite changed. No one wanted to be supporting us anymore, and our little movement, Hailsham, Glamorgan, the Saunders Trust, we were all of us swept away. "What was this Morningdale scandal you keep mentioning, Miss Emily?" I asked. "You'll have to tell us, because we don't know about it." "Well, I suppose there's no reason why you should. It was never such a large matter in the wider world. It concerned a scientist called James Morningdale, quite talented in his way. He carried on his work in a remote part of Scotland, where I suppose he thought he'd attract less attention. What was uh, he wanted to offer to people the possibility of having children with enhanced characteristics, superior intelligence, superior athleticism, that sort of thing. Of course, there'd been others with similar ambitions, but this Morningdale fellow, He'd taken his research much further than anyone before him, far beyond legal boundaries. Well, he was discovered. They put an end to his work, and that seemed to be that. Except, of course, it wasn't, not for us. As I say, it never became an enormous matter, but it did create a certain atmosphere, you see. It reminded them of a fear they'd always had. It's one thing to create students, such as yourselves, for the donation program, but a generation of created children who'd take their place in society, children demonstrably superior to the rest of us, oh no, that frightened people. They recoiled from that. But Miss Emily, I said, what did any of that had to do with us? Why did Hailsham had to close because of something like that? We didn't see an obvious connection either, Kathy. Not at first. And I often think now, we were culpable not to do so. Had we been more alert, less absorbed with ourselves, if we'd worked very hard at that stage when the news about Morningdale first broke, we might have been able to avert it. Oh, Mary Claude disagrees. She thinks it would have happened no matter what we did, and she might have a point. After all, it wasn't just Morningdale. There were other things at that time, that awful television series, for instance. All these things contributed to the turning of the tide. But I suppose when it comes down to it, the central flaw was this. Our little movement, we were always too fragile, always too dependent on the whims of our supporters. So long as the climate was in our favor, so long as a corporation or a politician could see a benefit in supporting us, then we were able to keep afloat. But it had always been a struggle. And after Morningdale, after the climate changed, we had no chance. The world didn't want to be reminded how the donation program really worked. They didn't want to think about you students or about the conditions you were brought up in. In other words, my dears, they wanted you back in the shadows. Back in the shadows where you'd been before the likes of Mary Claude and myself ever came along. And all those influential people who'd once been so keen to help us, well, of course, they all vanished. We lost our sponsors one after the other in a matter of just over a year. We kept going for as long as we could. We went on for 2 years more than Glamorgan. But in the end, as you know, we were obliged to close, and today there's hardly a trace left of the work we did. You won't find anything like Hailsham anywhere in the country now. All you'll find, as ever, are those vast government homes. And even if they're somewhat better than they once were, let me tell you, my dears, you'd not sleep for days if you saw what still goes on in some of those places. And as for Mary Claude and me, here we are. We've retreated to this house. The upstairs we have a mountain of your work. That's what we have to remind us of what we did. And a mountain of debt, too, though that's not nearly so welcome. And the memories, I suppose, of all of you. And the knowledge that we've given you better lives than you would have otherwise. Don't try and ask them to say thank you, Madame's voice said from behind us. Why should they be grateful? They came here looking for something much more. What we gave them, all the years, all the fighting we did on their behalf, what do they know of that? They think it's God-given. Until they came here, they knew nothing of it. All they feel now is disappointment, because we haven't given them everything possible. Nobody spoke for a while. Then there was noise outside, and the doorbell rang again. Madame came out of the darkness and went out into the hall. This time it must be the man, Miss Emily said. I shall have to get ready, but you can stay a little longer. The men will have to bring the thing down 2 flights of stairs. Mary Claude will see they don't damage it. Tommy and I couldn't quite believe that was the end of it. We neither of us stood up, and anyway, there was no sign of anyone helping Miss Emily out of her wheelchair. I wondered for a moment if she was going to try and get up by herself. But she remained still, leaning forward as before, listening intently. Then Tommy said, "So, there's definitely nothing. No deferral. Nothing like that." "Tommy," I murmured and glared at him. But Miss Emily said gently, "No, Tommy. There's nothing like that. Your life must now run the course that's been set for it." "So, what you're saying, miss," Tommy said, "is that everything we did, all the lessons, everything, it was all about what you just told us? There was nothing more to it than that?" "I can see," Miss Emily said, "that it might look as though you were simply pawns in a game. It can certainly be looked at like that. But think of it. You were lucky pawns. There was a certain climate, and now it's gone. You have to accept that sometimes. That's how things happen in this world. People's opinions, their feelings, they go one way, then the other. It just so happens you grew up at a certain point in this process. It might be just some trend that came and went," I said. "But for us, it's our life." "Yes, that's true. But think of it. You were better off than many who came before you, and who knows that what those who come after you will have to face. I'm sorry, students, but I must leave you now. George! George!" There had been a lot of noise out in the hallway, and perhaps this had stopped George from hearing, because there was no response. Tommy asked suddenly, "Is that why Miss Lucy left?" For a while I thought Miss Emily, whose attention was on what was going on in the hallway, hadn't heard him. She leaned back in her wheelchair and began moving it gradually towards the door. There were so many little coffee tables and chairs, there didn't seem a way through. I was about to get up and clear a path when she stopped suddenly. "Lucy Wainwright," she said. "Ah, yes. We had a little trouble with her." She paused, then adjusted her wheelchair back to face Tommy. "Yes, we had a little trouble with her. A disagreement. But to answer your questions, Tommy, the disagreement with Lucy Wainwright wasn't to do with what I've been telling you. Not directly, anyway. No, that was more, shall we say, an internal matter." I thought she was going to leave it at that, so I asked, "Miss Emily, if it's all right, we'd like to know about it, about what happened with Miss Lucy." Miss Emily raised her eyebrows. "Lucy Wainwright? She was important to you? Forgive me, my dear students, I'm forgetting again. Lucy wasn't with us for so long, so for us she's just a peripheral figure in our memory of Hailsham, and not an altogether happy one. But I appreciate, if you were there during those years—" She laughed to herself and seemed to be remembering something. In the hall, Madame was telling the man off really loud. But Miss Emily now seemed to have lost interest. She was going through her memories with a look of concentration. Finally, she said, "She was a nice enough girl, Lucy Wainwright. But after she'd been with us for a while, she began to have these ideas. She thought you students had to be made more aware of what lay ahead of you, who you were, what you were for. She believed you should be given as full a picture as possible. That to do anything less would be somehow to cheat you." We considered her view and concluded she was mistaken. "Why?" Tommy asked. "Why did you think that?" "Why? She meant well, I'm sure of that. I can see you were fond of her. She had the makings of an excellent guardian. But what she was wanting to do, it was too theoretical." We had run Hailsham for many years. We had a sense of what could work, what was best for the students in the long run beyond Hailsham. Lucy Wainwright was idealistic, nothing wrong with that, but she had no grasp of practicalities. You see, we were able to give you something, something which even now no one will ever take away from you. And we were able to do that principally by sheltering you. Helsham would not have been Helsham if we hadn't. Very well, sometimes that meant we kept things from you, lied to you. Yes, in many ways we fooled you. I suppose you could even call that. But we sheltered you during those years, and we gave you your childhoods. Lucy was well meaning, though. Enough. But if she'd had her way, your happiness at Helsham would have been shattered. Look at both of you now. I'm so proud to see you both. You built your lives on what we gave you. You wouldn't be who you are today if we'd not protected you. You wouldn't have become absorbed in your lessons. You wouldn't have lost yourself in your art and your writing. What should you have done, knowing what lay in store for each of you? You would have told us it was all pointless, and how could we have argued with you? So she had to go. We could hear Madame now shouting at the man. She hadn't lost her temper exactly, but her voice was frighteningly stern, and all the men's voices, which was until this point had been arguing with her, fell silent. Perhaps it's just as well I've remained in here with you, Miss Emily said. Mary Claude does this sort of thing so much more efficiently. I don't know what made me say it. Maybe it was because I knew the visit would have to finish pretty soon. Maybe I was getting curious to know how exactly Miss Emily and Madame felt about each other. Anyway, I said to her, lowering my voice and nodding towards the doorway. Madame never liked us. She's always been afraid of us, in the way people are afraid of spiders and things. I waited to see if Miss Emily would get angry, no longer caring much if she did. Sure enough, she turned to me sharply, as if I had thrown a ball at her, and her eyes flashed in a way that reminded me of her Hailsham days. But her voice was even and soft when she replied, Mary Claude has given everything for you. She has worked and worked and worked. Make no mistake about it, my child. Mary Claude is always on your side, and will always be on your side. Is she afraid of you? We're all afraid of you. I myself had to fight back my dread of you almost every day I was at Hailsham. There were times I'd look down at you, all from my study window, and I'd feel such revulsion. She stopped. Then something in her eyes flashed again. But I was determined not to let such feelings stop me doing what was right. I fought those feelings, and I won. Now, if you'd be so good as to help me out of here, George should be waiting with my crutches. With us at each elbow, she walked carefully into the hall, where a large man in a nursing uniform started with alarm and quickly produced a pair of crutches. The front door was open to the street, and I was surprised to see there was still daylight left. Madame's voice was coming from outside, talking more calmly now to the man. It felt like time for Tommy and me to slip away, but the George man was helping Miss Emily with her coat, while she stood steadily between her crutches. There was no way we could get past, so we just waited. I suppose, too, we were waiting to say goodbye to Miss Emily. Maybe, after everything else, we wanted to thank her. I'm not sure. But she was now preoccupied with her cabinet. She began to make some urgent point to the man outside, then left with George, not looking back at us. Tommy and I stayed in the hall for a while longer, not sure what to do. When we did eventually wander outside, I noticed the lamps had come on all the way down the long street, even though the sky wasn't yet dark. A white van was starting up its engine. Right behind was a big old Volvo with Miss Emily in the passenger seat. Madame was now crouching by the window, nodding to something Miss Emily was saying, while George closed up the boot and moved round to the driver's door. Then the white van moved off, and Miss Emily's car followed. Madame watched the departing vehicles for a long time. Then she turned us, as though to go back into the house, and seeing us there on the pavement, stopped abruptly, almost shrinking back. "We're going now," I said. "Thank you for talking to us. Please say goodbye to Miss Emily for us." I could see her studying me in the fading light. Then she said, "Kathy H., I remember you. I remember you. Yes, I remember." She fell silent, but went on looking at me. "I think I know what you're thinking about," I said in the end. "I think I can guess." "Very well." Her voice was dreamy, and her gaze had slightly lost focus. "Very well. You are a mind reader. Tell me." "There was a time you saw me once, one afternoon, in the dormitories. There was no one else around, and I was playing this tape, this music. I was sort of dancing with my eyes closed, and you saw me." "That's very good. A mind reader. You should be on the stage. I only recognized you just now, but yes, I remember that occasion. I still think about it from time to time." "That's funny. So do I." "I see." We could have ended the conversation there. We could have said goodbye and left, but she stepped closer to us, looking into my face all the time. "You were much younger then," she said. "But yes, it's you." "You don't have to answer this if you don't want to," I said, "but it's always puzzled me. May I ask you?" "You read my mind, but I cannot read yours." "Well, you were upset that day. You were watching me, and when I realized, and I opened my eyes, you were watching me, and I think you were crying. In fact, I know you were. You were watching me and crying. Why was that?" Madame's expression didn't change, and she kept staring into my face. "I was weeping," she said eventually, very quietly, as though afraid the neighbors were listening, "because when I came in, I heard your music. I thought some foolish student had left the music on. But when I came into your dormitory, I saw you, by yourself, a little girl, dancing. As you say, eyes closed, far away, a look of yearning. You were dancing so very sympathetically. And the music, the song, there was something in the words. It was full of sadness." "The song," I said. "It was called Never Let Me Go." Then I sang a couple of the lines quietly under my breath for her. "Never let me go. Oh, baby, baby, never let me go." She nodded as though in agreement. Yes, it was that song. I've heard it once or twice since then. On the radio, on the television. And it's taken me back to that little girl, dancing by herself. "You say you are not a mind reader," I said, "but maybe you were that day. Maybe that's why you started to cry when you saw me. Because whatever the song was really about, in my head, when I was dancing, I had my own version. You see, I imagine it was about this woman who'd been told she couldn't have babies. But then she'd had one, and she was so pleased, and she was holding it ever so tightly to her breast, really afraid something might separate them, and she's going, 'Baby, baby, never let me go.' That's not what the song's about at all, but that's what I had in my head at the time. Maybe you read my mind, and that's why you found it so sad. I didn't think it was so sad at the time, But now, when I think back, it does feel a bit sad. I'd spoken to Madame, but I could sense Tommy shifting next to me, and was aware of the texture of his clothes, of everything about him. Then Madame said, "That's most interesting. But I was no more a mind reader than today. I was weeping for an altogether different reason. When I watched you dancing that day, I saw something else. I saw a new world coming rapidly, more scientific, efficient, yes, more cures for the old sicknesses. Very good. But a harsh, cruel world. And I saw a little girl, her eyes tightly closed, holding to her breast the old kind world, one that she knew in her heart could not remain, and she was holding it and pleading never to let her go. That is what I saw. It wasn't really you, what you were doing. I know that. But I saw you and it broke my heart, and I've never forgotten." Then she came forward until she was only a step or two from us. "Your stories this evening, they touched me too." She looked now to Tommy, then back at me. "Poor creatures. I wish I could help you, but now you're by yourselves." She reached out her hand, all the while staring into my face, and placed it on my cheek. I could feel a trembling go all through her body, but she kept her hand where it was, and I could see again tears appearing in her eyes. "You poor creatures," she repeated, almost in a whisper. Then she turned away and went back into her house. We hardly discussed our meeting with Miss Emily and Madame on the journey back. Or if we did, we talked about the less important things, like how much we thought they'd age or the stuff in their house. I kept us on the most obscure back roads I knew, where only our headlights disturbed the darkness. We'd occasionally encounter other headlights, and then I'd get the feeling they belonged to other carers, driving home alone, or maybe like me, with a donor beside them. I realized, of course, that other people use these roads, but that night it seemed to me these dark byways of the country existed just for the likes of us, while the big glittering motorways with their huge signs and super cafes were for everyone else. I don't know if Tommy was thinking something similar. Maybe he was, because at one point he remarked, "Kath, you really know some weird roads." He did a little laugh as he said this, but then he seemed to fall deep into thought. Then, as we were going down a particularly dark lane in the back of nowhere, he said suddenly, "I think Miss Lucy was right, not Miss Emily." I can't remember if I said anything to that. If I did, it certainly wasn't anything very profound. But that was the moment I first noticed it. Something in his voice, or maybe his manner, that set off distant alarm bells. I remember taking my eyes off the twisting road to glance at him, but he was just sitting there quietly, gazing straight ahead into the night. A few minutes later, he suddenly said, "Kath, can we stop? I'm sorry, I need to get out a minute." Thinking he was feeling sick again, I pulled up almost immediately, hard against a hedge. The spot was completely unlit, and even with the car lights on, I was nervous another vehicle might come around the curve and run into us. That's why, when Tommy got out and disappeared into the blackness, I didn't go with him. Also, there had been something purposeful about the way he'd got out that suggested, even if he was feeling ill, he'd prefer to cope with it on his own. Anyway, that's why I was still in the car, wondering whether to move a little further up the hill, when I heard the first scream. At first, I didn't even think it was him, but some maniac who'd been lurking in the bushes. I was already out of the car when the second and third screams came, and by then I knew it was Tommy, though that hardly lessened my urgency. In fact, for a moment, I was probably close to panic, not having a clue where he was. I couldn't really see anything, and when I tried to go towards the streams, I was stopped by an impenetrable thicket. Then I found an opening and stepped through a ditch, came up to a fence. I managed to climb over it, and I landed in soft mud. I could now see my surroundings much better. I was in a field that sloped down sleepily, not far in front of me, and I could see that the lights of some village way below in the valley. The wind here was really powerful, and a gust pulled at me so hard I had to reach for the fence post. The moon wasn't quite full, but it was bright enough, and I could make out in the mid-distance, near where the field began to fall away, Tommy's figure, raging, shouting, flinging his fists and kicking out. I tried to run to him, but the mud sucked my feet down. The mud was impeding him too, because one time when he kicked out, he slipped and fell out of view into the blackness. But his jumbled swear words continued uninterrupted, and I was able to reach him just as he was getting to his feet again. I caught a glimpse of his face in the moonlight, caked in mud and distorted with fury. Then I reached for his flailing arms and held on tight. He tried to shake me off, but I kept on holding on until he stopped shouting and I felt the fight to go out of him. Then I realized he too had his arms around me, and so we stood together like that, at the top of that field, for what seemed like ages, not saying anything, just holding each other, while the wind kept blowing and blowing at us, tugging our clothes, and for a moment it seemed like we were holding onto each other because that was the only way to stop us being swept away into the night. When at last we pulled apart, he muttered, "I'm really sorry, Kath." Then he gave a shaky laugh and added, "Good job there weren't cows in the field. They have got a fright." I could see he was doing his best to reassure me it was all okay now, but his chest was still heavy and his legs shaking. We walked together back towards the car, trying not to slip. "You stink of cow poo," I said finally. "Oh God, Kath, how do I explain this? We'll have to sneak in round the back." "You'll still have to sign in." "Oh God," he said, and laughed again. I found some rags in the car and we got the worst of the muck off, but I had taken out the boot just while I was searching for the rags, the sports bag containing his animal pictures, and when we set off again, I noticed Tommy brought it inside with him. We traveled some way, not saying much, the bag on his lap. I was waiting for him to say something about the pictures. It even occurred to me he was working up to another rage when he'd throw all the pictures out of the window. But he held the bag protectively with both hands and kept staring at the dark road unfolding before us. After a long period of silence, he said, "I'm sorry about just now, Kath. I really am. I'm a real idiot." Then he added, "What are you thinking, Kath?" "I was thinking," I said, "about back then, at Hailsham, when you used to go bonkers like that, and we couldn't understand it. We couldn't understand how you could ever get like that. And I was just having this idea, just a thought really. I was thinking maybe the reason you used to get like that was because at some level you always knew." Tommy thought about this, then shook his head. "Don't think so, Kath. No, it was always just me. Me being an idiot. That's all it ever was." Then after a moment he did a small laugh and said, "But that's a funny idea. Maybe I did know, somewhere deep down. Something the rest of you didn't."